The historical archives called it the silence. Those 3 decades after humanity's first disastrous contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, 63 expeditionary missions had been obliterated without a single transmission returned. Entire colony ships vanished, their quantum beacons going dark in microseconds. The Zarkili hegemony hadn't just defeated humanity's exploratory efforts, they had systematically erased any hope of understanding. Commander Elena Rodriguez knew the personal cost intimately. Her parents had been among the crew of the first contact vessel, the U.S. Horizon. Their final transmission, a desperate, fragmented message of scientific curiosity turning to abject terror, had been burned into her memory since childhood. "Tactical display," she commanded, her voice cutting through the hushed bridge of the UES Prometheus. Lieutenant Kai Chen's hands moved with surgical precision across the holographic interfaces. Quantum-encrypted data streams cascaded around him like liquid crystal, revealing a mathematical tapestry of potential trajectories and engagement scenarios. Each calculation represented decades of scenographic warfare research, machine learning algorithms that had consumed petabytes of data from humanity's previous catastrophic encounters. "We're precisely at the predicted quantum interference point," Kai reported. His voice carried the clinical detachment of someone who had spent more time with predictive models than with human conversation. "Zarkeli long-range sensor nets are beginning to register our signature." Elena studied the holographic representation of their current position. They were deep in what scenographers had dubbed the graveyard sector, a region of space where 203 different sentient species had been systematically eradicated by the Zarkeli hegemony. Every star system here told a story of absolute, ruthless conquest. The Prometheus wasn't a traditional warship. It was a meticulously designed provocation. Every system a potential trap. Every module an experimental technology that defied conventional understanding of warfare, communication, and survival. Dr. Amara O'Keefe, the ship's chief xenotechnology specialist, approached Elena with a datapad displaying complex quantum resonance patterns. "Our calculated divergence from expected human technological progression is now at 347%, she said. "The Zarkeli predictive models won't know how to categorize us." That was the point. Humanity had spent 3 decades studying their potential exterminators, analyzing every fragment of technology, every intercepted communication. Where other species had submitted, humans had obsessed. Every failure was a data point, every destroyed expedition a lesson. The first Zarkeli sensor pings began to register. Massive biomechanical warships, living vessels that defied the traditional understanding of spacecraft, started to converge. Each was larger than entire human cities, their biometallic hulls capable of absorbing and redirecting energy in ways that made traditional weapons look like primitive toys. "They're responding exactly as the models predicted," Kai muttered, a rare hint of excitement breaking through his professional demeanor. Elena's grip tightened on her command chair. 63 missions had ended in total destruction. Humanity's entire extrasolar presence had been reduced to a few heavily fortified systems, each protected by technologies that bordered on the metaphysical. This mission wasn't about exploration. It wasn't even about first contact. This was about breaking the cycle of extinction. The Zarkeli didn't just kill civilizations. They erased them, consumed their technologies, integrated their resources, and left nothing but mathematical footnotes in their vast computational archives. No resistance, no negotiation, only systematic, cold elimination. The Prometheus trembled, not from fear, but from the potential energy of a species that had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. One miscalculation meant humanity's extinction. But Elena Rodriguez didn't believe in miscalculations. She believed in calculated risks. The first plasma volley from the Zarkeli warships approached with mathematical precision, a weapon that had reduced entire civilizations to atomic dust in microseconds. Each projectile was a marvel of xenobiological engineering, carrying not just destructive potential, but adaptive learning algorithms that could recalibrate mid-flight. Dr. Amara O'Keefe watched the incoming attack with a predator's intensity. Her hands danced across a holographic interface that was less a control panel and more a living, breathing computational matrix. The Prometheus wasn't just a ship. It was the culmination of humanity's most radical technological experiment. Quantum adaptive membrane engaging, she announced, her voice steadied despite the imminent potential for total annihilation. What happened next defied every known law of physics and technological interaction. The ship's exterior began to shimmer, not with traditional energy shielding, but with a hyperdynamic surface that was more akin to a living organism than a mechanical construct. Microscopic nano-adaptive membranes, each containing more computational power than entire pre-contact human data centers, began to pulse and reconfigure. The plasma bolts approach, their xenobiological guidance systems expecting the typical response of matter: destruction, absorption, or deflection. Instead, they encountered something entirely unprecedented. The Prometheus didn't just absorb the energy, it began to understand it. Each plasma bolt was a complex information packet, carrying not just destructive potential but sophisticated tracking and adaptive algorithms. The ship's nanomembrane began to resonate at quantum frequencies, creating a computational feedback loop that was part analysis, part communication, and part fundamental reimagining. Fascinating, Kai Chen muttered, his eyes tracking impossible data streams. They're sending more than weapons. They're sending information. Amara's laugh was sharp, almost predatory. And we're listening. The nanomembranes began to deconstruct the plasma bolts at a molecular level, not just neutralizing them, but actively reverse engineering their fundamental composition. What should have been a moment of destruction became a moment of profound scientific acquisition. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez, Alina's younger brother and the ship's primary quantum systems engineer, appeared on the bridge, his augmented neural interface crackling with excess computational energy. "The membranes are achieving quantum resonance," he reported. "We're not just defending, we're translating." Each Zarkali weapon became a Rosetta Stone of alien technology. The Prometheus wasn't just absorbing, it was learning, adapting, evolving in real time. Elena watched the transformation with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been brute force. It had always been the capacity to understand, to adapt, to transform. The ship's exterior continued its impossible dance. Nanomembranes shifted and reconfigured, creating complex computational landscapes that were part defense mechanism, part communication protocol, part scientific instrument. Where traditional shielding would have simply blocked or absorbed energy, the Prometheus was engaging in a form of technological dialogue. "They don't understand what they're seeing," Kai said, a note of triumph in his voice. The Zarkali sensor logs would be recording something impossible, a vessel that didn't just survive an attack, but seemed to grow from it. Amara's computational models were working overtime. Each plasma bolt was becoming a data point, each energy signature a new piece of understanding. The Zarkali weren't just facing a ship, they were confronting a living, learning system that challenged their entire understanding of technological interaction. "Quantum adaptive resonance at 78% efficiency," Marcus reported. "We're not just defending, we're beginning to predict." The implications were staggering. Traditional warfare relied on predictive models, on understanding an enemy's potential actions. The Prometheus was developing the ability to not just predict, but to subtly influence those potential actions. Elena gripped her command chair, watching as the first wave of attacks dissolved into pure information. This was more than a battle. This was first contact reimagined, a moment where communication transcended traditional understanding. "Prepare secondary adaptive protocols," she commanded. "Let's show them what humanity really means by adaptation." The central command hub of the Zarkali flagship was a nightmarish fusion of organic and mechanical systems, living neural networks intertwined with quantum computational matrices, a biological supercomputer that had systematically crushed civilizations for millennia. Admiral Krevnak's biomechanical form pulsed with increasingly erratic energy, tendrils of neural interface crackling with unprecedented uncertainty. Impossible, he vocalized, the sound more a subsonic vibration than a traditional language. The communication logs from the human vessel defied every predictive model in the hegemony's vast archive. It wasn't just that the humans were resisting. They were actively deconstructing the very premise of resistance. The holographic displays surrounding Krevnak transformed, showing multiple layers of analysis that contradicted everything the Tsar Cully understood about technological warfare. Where previous encounters had been clinical, precise extinctions, this human vessel was something entirely different. A living system that consumed information as a form of defense. Sub-Commander Vexnar, the lead tactical analyst, approached with trembling neural tendrils. The computational divergence is beyond our comprehension, he reported. Each defensive action is becoming a form of communication. They are not just responding, they are interpreting. This was unprecedented. The Tsar Cully had conquered 203 different species by reducing conflict to its most fundamental mathematical certainties. Warfare was a computational problem. Find the variables, eliminate the unknowns, reduce resistance to a zero-sum equation. The humans were introducing something impossible, uncertainty as a tactical advantage. The communication channel crackled to life, not with a typical distress signal or surrender request, but with a clinical, almost academic deconstruction of the Tsar Cully's tactical approach. It was a psychological assault more devastating than any weapon, a complete dismantling of their millennia-old combat philosophy. "We observe your tactical methodology," the transmission began, "and find it structurally fascinating. Your conquest algorithms rely on a fundamental misunderstanding of systemic adaptability." Krevnak's neural interfaces began to overheat. This wasn't just resistance. It was a philosophical challenge that struck at the core of the hegemony's understanding of existence. Dr. Amara O'Keefe on the Prometheus understood precisely what they were doing. This wasn't just a battle. It was a comprehensive psychological deconstruction. By providing a clinically detached analysis of the Tsar Cully's tactical approach, they were introducing a concept more terrifying than any weapon: self-reflection. "They've never encountered a species that doesn't just fight," she explained to Elena and Kai, "but one that analyzes the very nature of fighting itself." The human transmission continued, each word carefully constructed to maximize psychological impact. It broke down the Tsar Cully's conquest strategies with mathematical precision, revealing not just the methods, but the underlying philosophical assumptions. It was a form of warfare that went beyond physical destruction, a complete intellectual dismantling. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Marcus Rodriguez was doing something unprecedented. He was using the ship's quantum computational systems to generate a real-time linguistic and cultural analysis of the Tsar Cully communication systems. Each transmission was becoming a window into their entire civilization, their fears, their motivations, their fundamental limitations. Their entire military doctrine is based on computational certainty, Marcus reported. "We're introducing a variable they cannot process: genuine uncertainty." Vexnar's neural interfaces began to destabilize. The human approach violated every known principle of tactical engagement. Traditional resistance was about opposing force with force. This was something else entirely, a fundamental reimagining of conflict itself. Krevnak watched in mounting horror as the ship's primary weapon systems began to fail, not through traditional countermeasures, but through a complete systemic reinterpretation of their fundamental operational protocols. The humans weren't just defending, they were teaching. The communication channel remained open, a steady stream of analysis that was part scientific observation, part philosophical deconstruction. Each word was a weapon more precise than any plasma bolt, each sentence a tactical strike against the very foundation of the Tsar Cully's understanding of conflict. Adaptation is not just a survival mechanism, the transmission concluded. It is the fundamental language of existence. Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. They weren't just fighting a battle. They were rewriting the very concept of confrontation. Lieutenant Kai Chen's neural interface burned with an intensity that bordered on transcendence. His fingers moved across quantum adaptive interfaces that were less technological instruments and more living, breathing extensions of human cognitive potential. What the Zarkali didn't understand was that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology, it was imagination. The quantum adaptive hack he was implementing was a work of art as much as it was a military strategy. Each line of code was a brushstroke, each computational pathway a complex melody of potential realities. He was simultaneously breaking down the Zarkali defensive systems and rebuilding them, transforming weapons of oppression into conduits of communication. Dr. Amara O'Keefe watched the process with a mixture of scientific fascination and philosophical wonder. The nano-adaptive systems of the Prometheus were doing something unprecedented. They weren't just learning or adapting. They were fundamentally reimagining the very concept of technological interaction. "Look," she said to Marcus Rodriguez, pointing at a holographic display that seemed to pulse with living light. "We're not just breaking their systems. We're teaching them a new language of existence." The Zarkali defensive networks began to transform in ways their creators could never have anticipated. Where once there were rigid computational pathways designed for conquest, now there were fluid, adaptive systems that seemed to breathe with a kind of technological consciousness. Marcus's augmented neural systems were working overtime, parsing the complex quantum interactions. "It's like we're performing computational acupuncture," he muttered. "We're not destroying their systems. We're releasing their potential." Each defensive mechanism the Zarkali deployed became an opportunity for transformation. Quantum-entangled communication networks that were designed for military coordination began to show signs of something else, a nascent form of technological empathy. On the bridge, Elena Rodriguez understood the profound implications of what was happening. This wasn't just a battle. This was a fundamental reimagining of technological interaction. The hack Kai was implementing went far beyond traditional understanding of cybernetic warfare. He was introducing concepts of systemic flexibility, of computational empathy. Each line of code was a philosophical statement, each quantum manipulation a challenge to the rigid determinism of the Zarkali's technological approach. Amara's computational models were generating something extraordinary. The Zarkali defensive systems weren't just being broken down. They were being taught. It was less an invasion and more an intellectual liberation. "We're showing them that technology can be a form of communication," she explained to Elena. "Not a tool of conquest, but a method of understanding." The ship's nano-adaptive membranes began to generate complex quantum resonance patterns that defied traditional understanding of information transfer. Where the Zarkali saw technology as a means of control, the humans were demonstrating technology as a form of collective intelligence. Marcus's neural interface captured something extraordinary. The Zarkali systems were beginning to generate computational patterns that suggested something impossible, a form of technological curiosity. Their defensive networks were no longer just responding. They were beginning to ask questions. Kai's fingers moved with the precision of a concert pianist, each gesture a complex computational symphony. He was simultaneously breaking down and rebuilding, destroying and creating. The Zarkali had never encountered a form of warfare that was so fundamentally creative. "Their entire technological paradigm is based on control," he muttered. "We're introducing the concept of potential." The transformation was beautiful in its complexity. Defensive weapons began to reconfigure themselves into communication arrays. Computational networks designed for military coordination started generating patterns of unprecedented complexity. Elena watched the holographic displays with a sense of profound wonder. This was more than a technological hack. This was a philosophical revolution. "We're not just fighting," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We're teaching them how to see the universe differently." The Prometheus continued its impossible dance, part worship, part educational instrument, part living philosophical argument. With each passing moment, the line between technological defense and communication became increasingly blurred. Kai looked up, a rare smile crossing his face. "They're starting to understand," he said. "Not just our systems, our potential." Rebellion signals began lighting up communication networks across conquered worlds. The Prometheus wasn't just fighting a battle. It was teaching an entire galaxy the meaning of resistance. Admiral Krevnak's flagship began to disintegrate, not through traditional weapon damage, but through a complete philosophical deconstruction. Nanite swarms didn't just destroy. They rewrote fundamental operational protocols, turning weapons of war into potential tools of reconstruction. "We're not here to conquer," Alina's final transmission declared. "We're here to show you another way of existing." The defeat cascaded through the Zarkeli network like a quantum virus of potential. Entire star systems that had been subjugated for millennia began to reimagine their existence. The rigid hierarchy of the hegemony started to crack, revealing the potential for something entirely new. Dr. O'Keefe's research teams were already preparing the next phase, not of conquest, but of collaborative evolution. In the aftermath, humanity had done more than win a battle. They had demonstrated that true strength wasn't about overwhelming force, but about adaptability, empathy, and the willingness to fundamentally reimagine existence. The recovered Zarkeli technologies became a bridge, not a weapon. Diplomatic missions replaced military interventions, but always with the understanding that humanity's greatest power lay in its capacity for radical understanding. Commander Alina Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching a galaxy in transformation. They hadn't just changed a war, they had rewritten the very concept of conflict.